Good morning, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. This meeting is now called to order. For those around the table, please microphone when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. We'll now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Transportation Policy Committee, I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Mayor Anderson. Councilmember Butler.
Present.
Thank you. Bill Daniels. Doug DeCoursey. Councilmember Edwards.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Freeman.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego. Vice Mayor Garland.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Haney.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Lesko.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Manfredi.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Here.
Thank you. Tyler Pace. Mayor Pizzillo.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Poston. Mark Reardon. Mayor Wires.
Present and accounted.
Thank you. Chair Wheatley.
I am here.
Thank you. Councilmember White.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Whitehead.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Madam Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you so much. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Before we proceed, I want to take a moment to introduce our newest members. We have Supervisor Lesko from Maricopa County and Mayor Anderson from the town of Gilbert. So I want to welcome them. Our next item is call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda. Informational items or items on the agenda for discussion and not action. 15 minutes will be provided for call to the audience unless I request an exception to that limit. I do have one request to speak for the call to the audience, and that is Andrew Marwick. If you would please step forward, state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Last year I was here and spoke about the heat island and climate change effect. Since then, we have a 5-alarm fire going. This year will be the hottest February ever in the history of Phoenix, based on the current forecast. Last summer, there were 70 days over 110, including several days in October over 110. This has been the driest December to February winter rain period ever, only 0.03 of an inch of rain. It's been almost a year now with less than an inch of rain, which is even crazy for dry for Phoenix. Also, in terms of light rail versus bus rapid transit, it's been about 25 years since the city of Phoenix decided to move forward with light rail. 16 years since it's been in operation. And only one 30-mile long segment is in operation. There's very little connectivity. This is taking way too long. Not just the South Central, which has taken over 5 years and had tremendous disruption to the local community and businesses down there, but the whole thing, just 25 years and there's only one segment open, is just not very effective. Bus rapid transit can effectively start this year, basically immediately. High-frequency buses can be started. Off-board app-based fare collection can be used to speed buses up. Lights can be signalized, and gradually the stations, the platforms can be built, and decisions can be made about whether it's middle of the street or at the curb. Things like that can be decided on later, and just get that running. Things are just going way too slow here. Prop 400 was supposed to have bus rapid transit. Now we're on to Prop 479. For example, Scottsdale and rural, you could go to 10-minute frequencies from Chandler Fashion Center out to Desert Ridge right now, and then upgrade segments of it for faster and higher capacity later. Same thing going out into the West Valley. You can go from Grand Canyon University, from the light rail at 19th and Camelback to Grand Canyon University, downtown Glendale, and out to Westgate area. Again, that could be done now, and eventually exact routing and design could be finished up later. So an extensive, well-connected bus rapid transit network could be built for the price of a few light rail lines, and can be done much more quickly and build the market share for transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marwick. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with the committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, have we received any online written comments for call to the audience?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received 2 written public comments called to the audience, and those have been provided to the members in advance of the meeting for consideration.
Excellent, thank you. We will move on to informational items. Items 4A through 4B are for information only. Does any member of the committee have any questions or request a presentation on either of these items? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is approval of the consent agenda, which is items 5A through 5D. On the consent agenda, do any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, prior to the approval of the consent agenda, there's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any item on the consent agenda. I have not received any requests to speak on the consent agenda. Staff, have we received any online written comments for the consent agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have not received any written comments on the consent agenda or any other item on today's agenda.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Mayor Wires, a second by Mayor Osborne.
Your family goes back to straight up doing
Have those
salutes
participating.
for that group of people. But
If you
did
could mute
consider
Thank you. You could mute for the time being. We will request you to take part in the voice vote by turning on your cameras and unmuting your audio. We do need to see the faces of everyone to participate in the voice vote. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on their cameras. Members, please leave on your cameras until after the roll call vote so that staff can count the people's names whose cameras are not on. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Great. And if you could please leave your cameras on and staff can take a roll call of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Haney, how do you vote?
I vote aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion passes.
Excellent. Well done. We will move on to items proposed to be heard. And this is on the agenda for action and will be presented by Velvet Matthew, Freeway Engineer Program Manager. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Whately and members of the Transportation Committee. I'm here to present the material cost change for Loop 303 from MC 85 to Van Buren Street project. I'll start with an overview of the project and give you a little bit of background about it and how we got to where we are today, as well as the requested increase for right-of-way funding. So let's start with an overview. I'd like to get us oriented on where the project is in relation to the region. Loop 303 MC 85 to Van Buren Street is located in the Southwest Valley. It is the extension of Loop 303 south of Interstate 10. It's highlighted here in the blue box. Here's a little more detailed map of the project limits. The project starts at the north at Van Buren Street and extends south to an interim connection with MC 85. Now, the project will be a vital link in connecting Interstate 10 with the future State Route 30. It will expand the regional connectivity in the Southwest Valley. And Cotton Lane today will not be able to meet the expected demand in the future. So Cotton Lane today is in general a 2-lane roadway with 1 lane in each direction, with several signalized intersections in the corridor. Cotton Lane is surrounded by a diverse area that includes agricultural, residential, commercial, and distribution centers. So ADOT completed the design concept report and identified the project limits as Van Buren Street to Elwood Street. This was the original concept. This would have constructed 2.5 miles of freeway. Now, as part of the fiscal year 24 FLCP annual update, the MAG Regional Council approved a scope modification to extend the southern limits from Elwood Street to an interim connection with MC 85, and it's shown here by the blue line. Effectively, what that did was it advanced a portion of State Route 30 into the current project. This would have been built as part of the future Loop 303 State Route 30 interchange in the future. The interim connection with MC 85 is identified here in the orange. Now, how does this fit with our plans for the future? Oh my, not clicking. Advance the slide timer. It's not working. Oops, go back. Okay. So as you can see, the connection between Loop 303 and the future State Route 30 is shown here in the purple dashed line. That interim connection with MC 85 would be removed once this connection is. So a little more overview. Loop 303, MC 85 to Van Buren Street will construct 4 new miles of freeway. There'll be 3 lanes in each direction north of Lower Buckeye Road, 2 lanes in each direction south of Lower Buckeye Road. The freeway will be elevated over every cross street, as well as the Union Pacific Railroad. And there will be one-way frontage roads on both sides of the freeway from Van Buren Street to Elwood Street. Here's the current project schedule. Final design started in September of 21. Right-of-way acquisition began in June of 2022 and is still currently underway. The project is on schedule to advertise for construction in June of this year. Construction will start a few months later and is anticipated to take 3 years. So let's talk about the right-of-way process. But first, I'd like to take a step back and talk about the overall ADOT project development process. Typically, a project completes a scoping and environmental phase first. This is where the original limits of the project are determined. Then, once that phase is complete, final design will begin. And during final design, there are 2 concurrent processes: utility relocation and right-of-way acquisition. Once clearances are received and final design is complete, then the project can advertise for construction. So now I'll drill down more into the right-of-way process. So during the scoping and environmental phase, preliminary plans are drawn and an early assessment of the right-of-way needs are estimated. During final design, the needs are refined and value engineered, and a full and partial acquisition as well as relocation costs are better identified. ADOT will then start to acquire all the necessary parcels, and once acquisition is complete, then the right-of-way clearance will be issued. So based on the DCR, remember that original kind of 2.5 mile project, the original estimated was that 56 parcels would be impacted by the project. When the limits of the project were extended south, 8 additional parcels were identified for a total of 64 parcels. As final design refined the needs, that number has actually been reduced to only 47 parcels. But please note the number of full acquisition increased to 11. So unfortunately, there's no correlation with the decreased number of parcels and the cost of right-of-way. Fortunately, it's quite the opposite. The original cost estimate based on the DCR concept was $50 million. Based on actual costs, and the current market trends of the real estate market as well as the housing sector, the estimate today is $170 million. That's a 240% increase. So that leads me to the requested increase today. I'll touch on the current funding of the project. So it stands as design and utility at $30 million. Right-of-way is currently funded at 94, and construction at $611 million. So that's a total program budget for the project of $735.5 million. Now, ADOT has requested an additional $76 million. That is a 10.3% increase over the program budget. And if this request is approved, the new program budget would be $811.5 million. So that large percentage increase triggered a material cost change process. Now, typically this request would be heard as part of an annual FLCP update, but due to the need and the timing of this, the request is being heard independent of that process. So the approval process looks like this. ADOT requested the additional funding. The request is being heard today at Transportation Policy Committee. If the committee recommends approval, this will then be presented to Regional Council for final approval. What are the program implications of this request? So the available program fund balance would be reduced to $895 million. And the request would also mean that there would be less available for any future request should they arise from existing projects. And with that, the action requested today is here on the screen. That completes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Velvet. Thank you for the presentation. And any questions from the members? Yes. Debbie Lesko.
Thank you, Madam Chair and staff. So can you explain to me when the original cost proposal took place and why was the route changed so that now we have to pay more for the right-of-way? Like, since this is my first meeting here, I need an explanation of the process and why that took place and why we're so off on the cost proposal.
So originally the recommendation was only to construct 2.5. But that would leave us with an end of freeway condition that ended at Elwood Street. Not necessarily ideal, but it can function. We had an opportunity to actually move part of the future SR 30 into the project. Of course, that supports our vision of a future. And so with that opportunity, unfortunately, that means we need to look to construct that new alignment. So yes, during the scoping phase, they could not have predicted the extension alignment at the time. So unfortunately, it does seem a little bit, and it probably would have had we known at the beginning that the actual alignment.
So Madam Chair and staff, so are you telling me that eventually we would have to have paid for this anyway? We're just extending this project more now instead of later. Is that what you're telling me?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Lesko, if I could jump into just to give a little bit more history. So the original limits of the 303 extension, as Ms. Matthew had indicated, ended at Elwood Street. And that was a perfectly fine interim connection. However, as development continues out there, it puts more and more pressure on that actual interchange itself. As part of the development of the fiscal year 2024 freeway program, if you recall where we were at in space and time, we didn't yet have enabling legislation for Prop 479 through the legislature. That certainly jeopardized the long-term viability of State Route 30. And so as a result, we looked at different options. What we found is that this interim connection, in effect, could serve as a longer-term connection if needed. And the value proposition was there too, because in effect, what it does is it actually advances construction of a portion of the freeway network we'll need anyway. And so the decision at the time was, okay, this is a worthwhile investment because it minimizes some of our risk and also benefits us for the future. What you're seeing, a lot of the cost increase is simply just driven by development and development pressures. ADOT has to pay fair market price to acquire the real estate. And as we've seen housing growth, as we've seen commercial growth, there's a lot of interest in that State Route 30 corridor that drives up the real estate prices. Sure.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Supervisor Lesko. Any additional questions? We do also.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I have a question.
please go ahead.
Thank you. So this is really being driven by the cost of living and so if we give this approval today, are we going to be able to facilitate this process before you have to come back and ask for another increase because the prices have increased? And so are we able to utilize the recommended amount that you're asking for to actually get this done? Or are you going to come back in, say, a year and say the prices have increased and we need to do this again? So that I actually had two questions. I apologize. That's the first question. The second question is, there are projects that are already approved in the process of being initiated. So I saw on the slide, it said that this is going to impact any potential new projects. And so is there going to be an impact to any projects that haven't started yet, but have already been approved for action?
So Chair Whately and members of the Transportation Policy Committee, yes, this is based on the latest estimate provided by ADOT. They're confident that this will be enough for the remaining parcels. Again, this process started in 2022. So we are at the end of the process, not at the beginning where things are a little more unpredictable. Secondly, I'll clarify the comment on the slide. Available funding for future unexpected changes would have a reduction in available funding. Projects that are already programmed have money set aside already.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions online or from the members in person? I will open it up for the public to comment. I do have a request to speak from Mr. Marwick. If you would take the podium, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The cost of just this 4-mile segment is almost closing in on $1 billion. Maybe it'll stop at around 700 million, but who knows? The cost for State Route 30 from the South Mountain Freeway out to just west of Cotton Lane and then up to 303 to Van Buren is going to be around $4 billion. By the time the critical connection from the Durango curve to the South Mountain Freeway and then from the 303 out to State Route 85, what are we going to be looking at? $8 billion, $10 billion? Who knows what that's going to be? This portion is only a portion of what's needed, the State Route 30 and 303. Again, the critical link will be to get traffic off of 10 and go into the Durango curve 17 and then onto the Broadway curve. So we're looking at least $7 or $8 billion probably for this by the time the whole thing is done. That is a huge percentage of Prop 479 funding. This is just going to encourage sprawling from the existing portion of the Phoenix area out into Western Buckeye, out into the Hassayampa Valley, where developers at Sun Valley Parkway, I don't know why they're building on Sun Valley Parkway and Cactus. Who would buy a house there? I don't know. The traffic won't stop at 202 in the State Route 30. They're going to try to get on the 10. They're going to try to go over to Scottsdale, and it's going to put congestion. And what the subject will come up later about the core of I-10 through the Deck Park Tunnel. And if that report clearly states that the Deck Park Tunnel cannot be widened, period, end of question. And that area is just going to start looking like Hubbard's Cave through Chicago or the slot through downtown Los Angeles. And building further and further out is going to greatly increase vehicle miles traveled, air pollution, and decrease the need to increase density and public transit closer into the city. So that this is, I strongly oppose any more funding for this and the entire project of State Route 30. And there's improvements as we'll discuss later. Can be improved to Interstate 10, can be improved somewhat, but building another whole new freeway out in that area, I'm opposed to. And the effect of the environment on the heat island, on air pollution, on the water supply of building that far west of State Route 85 and into the Hassayampa Valley is just getting ridiculous. So I'm strongly opposed to this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please.
I want to thank MAG staff for all the work they've been doing on the Southwest region. This is something we've been waiting for a long, long time, and look forward to the support of my elected officials on here because this is a very, very important project for the Southwest Valley. Thank you.
Mayor Pizzillo. Staff, do we have any written online comments on this agenda item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received no written public comments on this item.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to recommend approval for the material cost change request in the amount of 76 million for 303.
Hi, Chair. This is Councilmember White, City of Avondale. So moved.
We have a motion by Councilmember White.
This is Joe Pizzillo, Mayor of Goodyear. A second.
We have a second by Mayor Pizzillo. For those participating in the meeting online, to take part in the voice vote by turning on your cameras, unmuting your audio, and please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Great, that does pass. And please keep your cameras on. Staff, can you please take a roll call vote of the members participating virtually that did not turn on their cameras?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember White, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. The next item on the agenda will be presented by Jeremy Newman, Transportation Engineer. Thank you, Jeremy.
Good morning, Chair Wheatley and members of TPC. I am here to present on the minor improvements funding request for the I-17 Loop 303 northbound exit ramp widening. First, to give a little background on the North Valley, where the project is located. Okay. The North Valley has experienced and continues to experience growth and development, which has led to increased travel demand. This growth is expected to continue and has outpaced the existing capacity of the interchange out there. We've observed and completed a traffic analysis that showed this congestion backing up onto I-17, which has led to safety concerns. Just to give you an idea where the project is located, like I said, it's in the North Valley at 303 and I-17. So I-17 there is north-south, 303 is to the west, and Sonoran Desert Drive is to the east. This is essentially freeway to freeway connection. At the time, the signalized interchange was appropriate because of the volume that was going through this interchange. ADOT is currently in the process of designing a full system interchange at this location to address this. And this interchange and Loop 303 is currently being, or the Loop 303 is currently being widened through this segment. The timeline for that study is contingent on funding, the timeline for the construction is contingent on funding and is anticipated to be summer or fall of this year, with construction taking 2 years. So it'll be open in summer, fall of 2027. Just a quick overview of the Freeway Lifecycle Program. It's a management tool for the freeway and highway projects that are funded through Proposition 400. includes a minor improvements fund for small projects that are on a quick timeline so that there can be quick responses to projects that come up like this that pose safety concerns. $10 million is allocated to this annually, and this agenda item reflects a request for $2.1 million and is the third minor improvement allocation request of fiscal year 2025. So like I discussed earlier, this typically would be system interchange with flyover ramps where vehicles would not be stopping through a signalized intersection. And with the project that is coming up, it's going to take at least 2 years for that full system interchange to be constructed. The movement that is causing the issues backing up onto I-17 is the northbound to westbound movement, which is exiting I-17 with 1-lane exit and then passing through 2 signalized intersections. You can see with the pictures here that I-17, that traffic is then backing up onto I-17. And that picture in the lower left-hand corner, that is actually at Dixoletta and I-17, which is a mile south of Loop 303. So we are having queuing on I-17 that's over a mile long in this area. Here's a enlarged picture of that. And really the reason why this is an issue, safety concern, is that when vehicles are backing up on I-17, it causes unexpected stops on I-17. It causes large speed differentials between lanes. There is queue jumping that's happening. And then it also, in these situations, there tends to be more erratic driver behavior. So all of this combined together causes greater safety concerns. So what is the proposed solution for this area? The current condition is that there is a 1-lane exit, and to get off I-17, you have to be in the rightmost lane. In the second rightmost lane, you continue to the north on I-17. The proposed solution would be to widen the northbound exit ramp to 2 lanes. This would allow you to use the same, it would be the same conditions as we have today, where you can get off on the rightmost lane, and then in the second rightmost lane, you can continue to the north. But it would also allow for 2 lanes to exit I-17. What this does is it increases the number of vehicles that can exit the freeway, but then it also increases the storage capacity on the ramp so that there's more room for vehicles to be stored on the ramp and not back up onto the freeway. An added benefit to this is that the improvements are fully compatible with the future system interchange project and will actually help with the traffic control during the construction of that project. So the schedule, pending the approval of this funding request, we can advertise for construction at the end of this month or early next month. And construction is anticipated to be completed before the end of the year. And with that, that concludes my presentation, Mayor Wheatley and members of TPC, and I'm available for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Prior to voting, we do have an opportunity for members of the public to comment. I have not received any requests to speak for this agenda item. Staff, have we received any written online comments for this agenda item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received no written public comments for this item.
Thank you. I do have a comment from Mayor Orsborn.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to thank you again for these little pockets of money that help with these little pinch points, I guess we can call them, or bottlenecks. Eventually, there is an entire freeway interchange that happens at this location, and we don't want to wait for that construction, which is years down the road, in order to fix an issue that can be taken care of with $2.1 million out of this $10 million bucket of money that we have to make these interim improvements. So I just appreciate MAG and ADOT and the look forward at different locations like this, where it's a quick hit that takes care of the issue, instead of saying, well, we have a project that's many years out and the traveling public just kind of has to wait and feel the pain for that many years until we can make improvements. So thank you for your proactive approach to this.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would hear a motion to recommend approval for programming 2.1 million from the Freeway Life Cycle Program minor improvement allocation to Interstate 17 and Loop 303 system, Sonoran Desert Drive interchange, northbound exit ramp.
Also move.
A motion by Mayor Wilson,
Second.
a second by Mayor Osborne. We will have those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, please say nay.
Aye.
Members, please leave your camera on. Staff, can you take a roll call vote of those participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras? Or did we get everyone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. All cameras were on and the
Great.
motion passed.
Excellent. Thank you. Well done again. We will move on to item number 8, and this item is on the agenda for information and discussion and will be presented by John Bullen, Assistant Executive Director.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the Transportation Policy Committee. Happy to be here today to talk through the development of the Proposition 479 Freeway Lifecycle Program. So to begin with, to provide a little context, the region's plan, the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or RSTIP for short, was approved by the MAG Regional Council back in the summer of 2021. That represented the conclusion of more than 4 years worth of planning effort with significant public engagement. Ultimately, it's that plan that guides investments through the end of 2045, and of course served as the basis for the extension of Maricopa County's dedicated half-cent sales tax with Proposition 479. As we're talking about implementation of the RSTIP itself, it really occurs via one of 4 different mechanisms or vehicles, excuse me. Of course, we have the 3 modal programs, and then we also have funding set aside for the competitive programs allocation. Today's conversation will be focused on the freeway element, and specifically what our task is to take the planning level work that was done and put it together in an actual program for implementation. So back in 2021, with the approval of the RSTIP, there were a total of 79 projects identified for funding through the end of 2045. There was also funding identified for what we call these programmatic line items, whether those programmatic line items are the minor improvements allocation that we just heard, funding for litter landscaping sweep around the Valley Freeway system, as well as funding for advanced design, advanced work. Really our task now is to move into implementation. And so what we need to do, we have some statutory requirements that we need to fulfill. We have to go through the exercise of updating all the costs and the revenues. Of course, we've spent the last couple of months talking costs. We know we're going to have some challenges there. And then we also have to go through the exercise of establishing specific project sequencing. So when we put the plan together, we identified the implementation of projects within 5-year terms. Now we need to drill down on what those exact years will be. And so when we talk about developing the Prop 479 freeway program, there's really 3 separate considerations that we need to work through. The first is we have a statutory requirement that we must fulfill. So state statutes dictate that we come up with a financially balanced program. That's where the whole concept of a life cycle program stems from. What that means in simple terms is that as we put together the program, the estimated amount of cost between now and 2045 cannot exceed the amount of revenues that are available to us. The second consideration, really, we need to focus on near-term project sequencing. Prop 479, the half-cent sales tax, begins collections in 2026. That's a relatively short time away from now, particularly when you're talking in transportation terms, where 5 years is quick. And then finally, a lot of time has changed between where we're at today and when the plan was originally approved back in 2021. We traditionally do these life cycle program updates on an annual basis. So if the funding were in place, we'd be back in front of you every single year to catch all these changes. Well, because we're moving from planning to actual implementation, we haven't considered that for the last 4 years. So we have some catch up that we need to do. So I want to start first with development of a fiscally balanced program. And again, this is a statutory requirement. As I had mentioned, we've identified 79 discrete projects programmed for funding between phase 1, which begins in 2026, and phase 4, which ends in 2045. So when we put the plan together, the plan was approved back in the summer of 2021. We worked very tediously with ADOT to come up with project cost estimates for every single project, went through a fairly extensive exercise. There was a lot of time spent on this, a lot of effort spent on this. But those costs were all generated back in the fall of 2020. And as you might imagine, conditions have changed quite a bit since the fall of 2020. We also went through an extensive process to estimate revenues between now and 45. Again, that was done in the fall of 2020. And the working assumption at the time, in line with what we've seen historically in this region, was that any increase in construction costs would be offset by increases in revenue. Traditionally, what we see is larger revenue growth than we see construction costs. However, if you recall the presentation last month, unfortunately, that is not the case over the last 4 years. We've seen historic construction cost increases. So the total amount of estimated costs for the 79 projects back in the fall of 2020 was $12.8 billion. We recently completed the exercise with ADOT to update all those costs, and we are now sitting at $20.7 billion. In total, this is about a 61.5% increase. I think, truth be told, it could have been a lot worse. So fortunately, it's not quite as bad as we were originally anticipating. But last month, we talked through a lot of those factors that were really driving this cost increase. On the plus side, we have seen an increase in revenues. And so you might recall this chart from last month's presentation. These are all the different revenue streams that flow into the Regional Investment Plan, the RSTIP. So while we talk a lot about the dedicated half-cent sales tax, that's not the only source. And so when we're talking about the freeway program, there's actually 3 different sources that flow into the program itself. Of course, there's the dedicated half-cent sales tax that makes up an important component of that. But we also get a portion of funding through the State Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF, as well as a portion of the federal formula funds that flow to ADOT and then are sub-allocated into Maricopa County. And so what we found when we updated those revenues into the freeway program specifically is that we're looking at a roughly $4.2 billion cost, looking in constant dollars between where we're at today versus where we were last fall. So when you add it all together, of course, contingent on some of the assumptions that you're making, over the life of the program between now and 2045, or really ending in 2045, we're estimating a program deficit between $2 and $3 billion. However, the good news is that our program, depending on what assumptions we use, the program is largely in balance through the end of phase 2. And that's very good news because those are the near-term projects. And so we have about 10 years of the program being in balance, and then it goes out of sync. And as a result, if you look out 10 years, 11 years, there's a lot of variability associated. So we're not recommending a full program rebalance where we actually identify projects to slide out of the funded program. Specifically, what we're doing is we're proposing taking a more incremental approach and really don't want to react to this. And really the underpinning of that is taking into account that there is a lot of variability between now and 2036. The world is going to change considerably, and there's no reason to overreact at this point in time. And specifically when I'm talking about variability, I'll walk through some of the specific assumptions. But construction costs are certainly going to change. Our project scopes are going to change, and there's a lot that we don't know today. And so what we're recommending as we put together the program for consideration by this body in a few months is adopting really 3 different strategies. First, we're going to recommend that we reduce or nearly eliminate all debt service expenses. So when we put the plan together, we were incredibly conservative. We held back a pretty healthy fund balance, and we made assumptions for debt service expenses so that we could issue bonding. Our recommendation is to pretty much eliminate all debt service from the program. That will save us the expenses. Of course, the trade-off there is that projects are going to take a little longer to construct. But if we do that, it will help bring the program into balance. Second, we want to assume some degree of construction cost stabilization. So here's another chart that you might remember from last month. I think this really does a great job of telling the story about construction cost increases since 2003. You look at where we've been over the last 3 years, it's safe to assume that at some point, we're going to see a stabilization in the construction cost market, if not some degree of a correction. So again, as we're looking out 2 decades, assume that there's going to be some degree of a correction. And then finally, really look at adapting different cost containment strategies. So there's a lot of projects in the plan for which there's been no formal planning work done, for which there's been no formal design work done. And usually it's not until we initiate the planning work, the design work, that we can actually figure out ways to save money, to save costs. So a great example is we might have an interchange improvement along a given valley freeway. We have no idea what that is. So we're projecting a cost based on a project that we don't know what it is. And as we mature things, we can sort of build in the assumption that we'll be able to contain costs. I want to walk you all through a quick example. This is a relatively near-term example. And to do this, I really want to key in on a system interchange. So I'm just using this as an example. You might be familiar with this. This is what we call the North Stack. So this is at I-17 and Loop 101. Specifically, put yourself in the position you're driving west on Loop 101, approaching I-17. You can either go north to I-17 or south on I-17. When we look at a system interchange with those big ramps, we have different levels. You can think of it as stories of a house to separate traffic. You have the first level all the way down at the bottom, and you go all the way up to the 4th level. As you might imagine, when you're building projects, building structure high in the air costs a lot of money. So that's something that you have to take into consideration, particularly when you have engineers looking at things like what the curve radius is or how quickly cars need to get from point A to point B. And so what we've done over the last couple of months is we actually keyed in on the State Route 30 Loop 303 system interchange. You see that illustrated here. As Ms. Matthew had indicated during her presentation, we finished the DCR a number of years back, so we have some degree of formal engineering work. Well, at the time, we didn't know what the actual implementation of the project would be. We didn't know which portion would come first or which portion would be in a future Prop 479 plan. And so the concept was laid out for ADOT's best guess at the time. Well, one of the things that we've done over the last couple months is gone through a fairly extensive exercise to figure out, is there a better way to do this? And what ultimately ADOT and the engineering team came up with is, well, we actually have a better idea of when the projects will be sequenced. For instance, a Loop 303 extension further south of a State Route 30 is not funded in Prop 479. So why would we build that on a low level when we can prioritize lower levels? And so what we actually did is we did what's called the restacking of the interchange. So we just reconfigured the levels, no other changes. What this did is resulted in a cost savings to the Prop 479 program of $128 million. So that's a great example of a fairly simple solution that we were able to put forward as a result of additional design and engineering work that has a direct savings to the Prop 479 freeway program that you'll see reflected. And so this is an exercise that we want to go through. We're certainly not going to get this all done in 2 months, but we want to look at those projects, identify those opportunities that we have to save funding, And ultimately, as we build the program, assume that there's going to be continued levels of this value engineering exercise to help bring the program in balance and close that gap. Next item I want to talk about is near-term project sequencing. So as I had mentioned earlier, when we originally developed the program, we did so in 5-year increments. So we identified projects that would move forward in phase 1, some construction at some point between fiscal year 2026 and 2030, but we didn't actually identify the specific year that those projects move forward. So what you see on here is a map of all those phase 1 projects. And so now what we need to do is we need to go through the actual exercise of figuring out which projects go in fiscal year 26, which projects go in fiscal year 27, et cetera. And so I want to walk you all through some of those projects and what our initial proposal is. So the first one, to revisit an item that you just heard, Loop 303 from Lake Pleasant Parkway to the I-17, as well as the system interchange. This is a project for which the state had appropriated funding a few years back to do the final design. Final design is long underway. It'll be finished sometime this spring. This project will be ready to go to construction this spring. And so what we're recommending, we actually did an assessment of the Prop 400 program, as you heard earlier. We have funding available to actually accelerate these improvements to fiscal year 2025. So accelerate ultimate construction of this project to sometime this summer. In part to help accommodate this, there's a couple of projects in the Prop 400 freeway program that makes sense to push back. So a great example is the I-10 at Sky Harbor West interchange improvements. In the Prop 479 freeway program, we have larger improvements to I-10. It makes sense to do that project as part of a bigger project itself. Second project over in the West Valley, Loop 101 at I-10, the 91st Avenue connector. In the current Prop 400 project, we have what's called a directional HOV ramp currently funded for construction, set to go out this summer. The limits of that project are almost identical to this 91st Avenue connector. And so what we're recommending, we're going to be out there doing the construction. We're recommending that we advance this from phase 1 to fiscal year 2025, construct those improvements concurrently. I also want to note that this is one of the few projects for which the cost estimate actually came down. And in part, what's helping to drive the lower cost estimate is if we can construct it at the same time, we can save a lot of money there. Next project, I-10 at Jackrabbit Trail. This is a project that's in final design currently. We are recommending that we advance or that we program construction in fiscal year 2026 so that this project can start construction as soon as it's ready. This is another area of the valley that is seeing a lot of pressures. We did a presentation specifically on the Southwest Valley, seeing a lot of pressure at this interchange, and it needs improvement. It's another example of an interchange where you see backups onto the I-10 main line. Out in the Southeast Valley, State Route 24, Loop 202 to Ironwood Drive. As part of Prop 400, we built an interim freeway, so it's 2 lanes in each direction. If you travel along 24, you'll notice you have to stop at stoplights. What you do is you're actually getting off on the future traffic interchange ramps. So we have funding in 479 to turn this into a full freeway. Under final design now, we are recommending that it be programmed for construction in fiscal year 2026 as soon as final design completes. And then the next project, State Route 30. So as we look at that center segment of State Route 30, it's actually broken up into 5 smaller segments. It's set to be constructed from the eastern portion of the facility moving west. The first portion of that facility that is set to go to construction is the portion between 97th Avenue and Loop 202 South Mountain Freeway. This is under final design. Of course, there's been extensive efforts for advanced right-of-way acquisition for utility work. And so we're recommending programming this portion of State Route 30 in fiscal year 2027, which is ultimately when the final design will be ready and that facility will be ready to move forward. And then the last really element for consideration in developing the Prop 479 freeway program is adjusting projects and phasing. So as I had mentioned, the plan was approved nearly 4 years ago. So things have changed, conditions have changed. You've seen development patterns within your own jurisdictions change. You've seen priorities change. You've seen traffic patterns change. And as a result, there are some projects for which we're recommending that we consider potential changes in phasing as well as project scopes. And I want to walk this body through what our proposal is. So first, State Route 30. Here's a map to help orient the committee to State Route 30. So there's a western project between State Route 85 and Loop 303. There's the center segment between Loop 303 and Loop 202. This is the project that we spent a lot of time talking about today. And then there's the eastern project between Loop 202 and I-17. So the center segment is actually the biggest priority as you're looking at State Route 30. That's the section of the freeway that actually takes the most pressure off of I-10, that carries the highest volume of traffic. And it's particularly important as you look at some of the freight connectivity, as you look at some of the development out there. So as I had mentioned, we have final design underway. We've proposed initiating construction for that first portion in fiscal year 2027. But quite honestly, what we need to do is we need to dust off our implementation plan that we put together back in 2021, and we need to figure out what the actual sequencing of this facility looks like. It is a very expensive facility. It's a very complicated facility. There are a lot of considerations. There's high voltage power lines. There's water lines that go in and out of Palo Verde that conflict with it. And so we're intending on working with ADOT over the next couple of months to figure out what the implementation plan for the center segment is, and intend for a presentation in April to walk through that. As part of the investment plan, funding was also allocated to initiate that very first phase on the SR 30 West to really identify what that corridor is, identify what that alignment is, identify an implementation plan. And so we're recommending programming that work to really initiate in fiscal year 2027. Next, I want to look at the Northwest Valley. So as part of the plan, we had funding identified for a new traffic interchange between US 60 Grand Avenue and El Mirage Road at Loop 303 and Litchfield. Well, there's been a lot of work underway. We have a big study underway. We've been working with ADOT to figure out is there a better interchange location or a different interchange location that will help relieve or alleviate some of the pressures that we're seeing out there. And what we actually found is that we've identified a location for a new interchange at Loop 303 and 155th Avenue. This is really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps relieve some of that pressure that we're seeing. And number two, if we were to construct ultimate improvements at Loop 303 and US 60, absent a second way in or out, the traffic challenges that residents are feeling out there are only going to be exacerbated. So we need additional connectivity. We need a different way in and out. So we're actually recommending that we exchange funding for the Loop 303 with the Loop 303 at 155th Avenue. And that depending on the cash flow, if we're able to advance this into phase one, we do so. Also at Loop 303 US 60, this is another area just over the last 4 years, we've seen significant growth. And so we're recommending we initiate development activities for that full system interchange, which is funded in the plan. And again, look at the cash flow if we're able to advance those improvements to phase two. Moving south at State Route 347, I-10 to Riggs Road. 347 is a very important corridor. This is the major lifeline in and out of the city of Maricopa. This corridor is congested, heavily congested. There are a lot of safety issues. There are a lot of challenges. Final design is underway. City of Maricopa, a lot of folks have been working at trying to secure additional legislative funding. We have funding as part of the Prop 479 plan for the Maricopa County section of it. And so all we're recommending is that we position the Maricopa County portion of that project to be able to move forward if City of Maricopa and others are able to secure additional resources to build the Pinal County portion. It's really important that we build this project together. And then looking at US 60 out in the East Valley, Ellsworth Road to Meridian Road. US 60 is a facility between Loop 101 and the Super Red Tan interchange that you see as many as 12 lanes. It eventually tapers down to 4 lanes. So this is another area where we're seeing a lot of traffic impacts due to growth. So we're recommending that we advance project development work into the first phase, and then if cash is available, advance construction into phase 2. And then finally, we have funding set aside for the rehabilitation of pavement around the region. We've been working with ADOT to come up with a priority list. That has been included in your agenda packet today. And our recommendation is that we follow the priorities set in that list to really address those, particularly to address those portions of the system that need immediate relief. Specifically, you look at the Loop 202 around the downtown area, as well as State Route 51. That pavement is in rough shape. And so our recommendation is to follow that priority list. So today's conversation is intended just to socialize some of the concepts, to get additional feedback. Based on the feedback provided by this group, we'll go through the exercise of actually building the specific program itself, bring that back to you all for additional consideration in April. And then if things work out, if everybody's in agreement, then we'll look to move that forward for action sometime this summer, as soon as May or June. So with that, Madam Chair, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation, John. And I appreciate MAG preparing us for this conversation over previous presentations. And, you know, when I look at an increase of, was it 61% overall? I have to just look at the positives. We're coming into 479 with 895 million surplus at the end of Prop 400. We have a positive fund balance through 2035, which is phase 3. And so with that, I appreciate this presentation again and support MAG in applying a more incremental measure. It allows us to get past this high inflationary period that we're experiencing, as long as we're meeting state statute. And so I do support that approach, as well as the strategies to balance reducing, eliminating debt service, the value engineering, project scope development. So I appreciate the work that has been done thus far, recognizing this is definitely a moving target, and we're doing the best we can, and recognizing incremental approach is appropriate from my perspective. But I will open it up for comments and questions for John. Yes, Supervisor Lesko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And John, I think I want to confirm what I think I heard. In the part where you talked about saving money by redesigning the stack interchanges, that it's less expensive to build at a lower level than a higher level. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then my question is, well, great. I'm glad you went back to redesign it, but why didn't you design it that way at the beginning?
Yeah, a good question, Madam Chair, members of the TPC. So that's an illustration of when ADOT came up with the initial design concept report. It was sometime in the mid-teens, 2015, 2016. And at the time, we didn't know when the actual projects would be implemented. We hadn't put together the investment plan to look out the next 20 years. We didn't know which projects would be included, which projects wouldn't. And so it represented sort of the best guess at the time. And the way that engineering works is the design concept report, or the scoping, really illustrates what we know at the time, best guess. And then as we move through the process is really when we sharpen our pencils and know when things are going to move forward. So it's largely a function of timing, and it's an opportunity. We now know things that we weren't able to know back then. And so we can really optimize what our solutions are that we're moving forward.
Madam Chair and John, I would assume if it's cheaper and you can do it by building the stack interchanges at a lower level, that then in the future you would just start at that point?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Lesko. So in this case, it's if you look at the project in aggregate, it's not necessarily cheaper or less expensive. It's where those and when those expenses hit. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, the Loop 303 extension further south of State Route 30, we don't have funding for that between now and 2050. So why do we need to optimize the cost of that today when we know that we have infrastructure that is moving forward in the very near term? And so the cost savings that we're seeing is on the near term. Potentially there might be higher costs later on.
So Supervisor Lesko, it's sort of the opposite of your first question where you said, so we're moving some we moved some project from the later time into the 303, that first item we talked about. We moved some of the project into this one, which made it go up. In this case, you're pushing some of the project for the future 303 going farther south the Hidden Valley into the future to that project and off of this 479. So it's the same concept. We're pushing costs from this project into the whatever will be 579 is how they came up with that savings.
And
So-
Madam Chair and John or Ed, maybe I just heard it wrong. So that's why I started with, did I hear that you went back on one of these stack interchanges and you decided, okay, it costs more to build it on tier 4 level. And so let's go back to the redesign and build the interchange at a tier 1 or tier 2 because it's less expensive.
Yes.
Did I hear that correctly? Okay. So my question is not about the timing or anything like that. It's like, why did we not just do it at tier 2 level from the beginning?
Yeah.
Because it's less expensive. And if it's doable, why not do it?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Lesko, and that's because when in the original concept at the tier 2 level, you had that 303 extension for south because we didn't know was that going to be the first project, was another. And now that we know what the priorities are, we were able to reconfigure to optimize current funding.
Thank you. Mayor Wires and then Mayor Wilson.
Yeah, I've been listening to the conversation and if I understand it, it would be similar to somebody that's just gotten married. They don't know if they're going to have 10 kids or 3 kids. They're going to build a new house. And to get by right now, they build a 3-bedroom house with the plans that they might be able to make it a 4-bedroom or a 5-bedroom down the road. Is that kind of the same idea?
Madam Chair, Mayor Wise, yes, precisely.
Okay, that makes sense to me. The way you started it, it was confusing. A little bit more confused. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson.
Yes, I've got one question. You were talking about the US 60 and extending the 3rd lane going out to Meridian.
Yes.
I'm going to ask a question. Why didn't we consider going all the way to Ironwood? Because that is a huge traffic congestion in that entire area right there.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the TPC, that largely relates to funding. And certainly the challenge that we're seeing outside of Maricopa County is that the only funding available are those resources through the state. And so that 1 mile extension would require the state identifying funding and appropriating funding. So certainly we can work to design it with them. But ultimately, to be able to come up with the money, it would require the state to identify the funding for that Pinal County section of it.
I understand, but like I said, it's where the huge amount of traffic is backed up, and especially right now, this time of the year, with the Renaissance Festival going out a little further east, and we get traffic backed all the way up past the 202.
And I think it's a good example it's yet another example that we've heard in here of why the state needs to do something about the gas tax, because in Pinal County, there's not the resources of the 479 tax to use there. So the Maricopa County taxpayers are paying for it to the Maricopa County border. Beyond that, either the Pinal County voters or the state, or the Pinal County or the state has to come up with the funding for that. And that from the state would have to come from the gas tax, which, if you go back to one of those charts, is the only funding source that's actually declining over time. So, Mayor Wilson, you're absolutely right. It feels like, why can't we do that? And the reason is how we fund transportation in the state of Arizona.
Yes, and I agree with that 1,000% in the aspect on it. Actually, even more than that, 1,000,000%.
Councilmember Manfredi and then Mayor Osborne.
Always forget the thing. Thank you so much for mentioning the 347 in there, because obviously we've had discussions about it constantly with everyone. So what you were mentioning too on the 60 is, when it hits into Pinal County, what happens? And that's what we fall into with the SR 347, where most of it, about half of it is within Pinal County. The other half is in Maricopa County. It all lies on a sovereign nation, the Gila River Nation. So there's a lot of problems, a lot of hurdles to overcome. But we are working with ADOT for some of the funding. But here in the city of Maricopa, we've basically we've had discussions and we're making a decision that we'll be following Maricopa County with their Prop 479 by putting a 0.5-cent sales tax on everything in the city of Maricopa. And that would go directly towards transportation and work for the 347. So that's something we're doing in the city of Maricopa to try and find some way to fund the Pinal County side, because the transportation tax in Pinal County, as you know, didn't pass. And without that transportation funding, we're stuck. So that's why the discussion is, when we do get that in place, which is the city council can do that. When we do put that in place, we'll be able to then take that money, work with ADOT for the funding. So that's going to help for us. But I want to thank John for bringing that up and talking about the 347. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Orsworth.
Thank you, Chair. John, that was a trip around the region. I appreciate the tour and looking at all the different projects, and really appreciate the thoughtful approach that we're taking in skinnying down projects to make sure that they're right sized for right now. We're going through kind of the same thing in the city of Buckeye with, for the first time in 40 years, we have the ability to go out for GO bonds. And that's to take care of some of the roadway improvements that are sorely needed, those pinch points. And what I've requested of our staff is let's just get lane miles in place to remove those pinch points. Sometimes that means we're not going to have all the gingerbread, I call it gingerbread, the all of the landscaping done, all of the sidewalks, the stuff that's outside of the lane miles, but at least we relieve some of those pressure points. And is that similar to the same approach that you're taking?
You bet.
Here on the tour?
Madam Chair, Mayor Orsman, yes. And I think to the point I made earlier too, it's predicated on doing some level of planning or engineering work so that we can figure out, okay, do we actually need this? Is there a way to reduce the right-of-way footprint? Is there a way to reduce the infrastructure? So you bet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Heaney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to kind of echo what's already been said a little bit here is, John, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the city of Surprise. You and your team and the partnership that we've been able to have has been so valuable for us as we try to navigate some of these challenges. I know we've talked in committee in the past about that US 60 Loop 303 corridor. I know you mentioned 2 projects. It's projects that my residents want, but not only them, but also other folks in the region because of the significance and the backups that we're seeing. That area is experiencing rapid growth, a lot of entitled lots that have been entitled way. I always joke when I was in high school, they were already entitled. And so now we're seeing the development actually come. And so we are taking action as far as the city goes and trying to look at ways that we can improve the infrastructure that we control. We're currently moving forward ahead of schedule on a 163rd Avenue expansion project. And those who aren't familiar with the area, that road is a major arterial roadway that is actually right at that intersection of US 60, a little bit west of the 303. So we're trying to take action on our part to try to help improve the infrastructure. But I'm very excited to see that this is being talked about of moving up to phase 1 because it's absolutely needed. It's needed from a public safety standpoint. It's needed just for the growth that we're projected to see in the area. And we can't do it without the collaboration that you and your team have shown. So I just want to thank you for that. And I did have one question. I know we mentioned before, we've had some interim improvements in that corridor, but those are only good for, we've done modeling, right? And so we're anticipating that those improvements are going to kind of be a moot point here pretty soon in the near future.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember Haney, I'd say that by 2035, we're going to need longer term solutions. And so certainly this interchange that we had talked about is one of them. Getting work underway on the ultimate interchange is another one.
Okay. So I know we've talked to our residents of, the interim solutions are good. It's to help alleviate some of that congestion, but we can't rely on those. And so seeing these moved up to phase 1 is very critical for the area. And I want to thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any additional comments from the committee? Any online? Okay, I understand that staff will build a program. We'll come back with recommendations in April. Great, thank you, John. We will move on to item number 10, update on the I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project. And this item is for information and discussion, will be introduced by Quinn Castro, transportation engineer. Quinn will be joined by Marcy McMacken, ADOT Outreach Manager, and Nicole Moon, I-10 Broadway Curve GEC Public Involvement Lead. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you, Chair, members of TPC. In the interest of time, I will go through my beginning part very quickly. The I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project improves 11 miles of I-10 between the Santan South Mountain Freeway. It represents the region's first freeway reconstruction project within the urban core and is the largest reconstruction project in state history. So construction on the project began in July of 2021 and is anticipated to be completed in spring of 2025. So that's this year. And this agenda item represents a progress update from the last time you heard from us in February of 2024. ADOT and our partner agencies have worked closely together toward the planning and implementation of this significant project. And with that, I welcome Marcy and Nicole.
Thank you, Quinn. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcy McMacken. I am with ADOT, and I'd like to thank you for having us here today to provide you an update on the I-10 Broadway Curve Improvement Project. Construction on this project began more than 3 years ago, and as you'll see in our presentation today, we are nearing the end of the construction process. As we get closer and closer to the finish line, we want to thank our project partners and our stakeholders for all their patience and support throughout the last 3.5 years. As we know, a project this large and of this scope through one of the busiest sections of Interstate 10 has undoubtedly impacted many, but rest assured the end is in sight and the project's expected to be completed in the spring of this year. Before we move on to some highlights of the project construction work from the past year, I'd like to quickly go over some of the main components of the project. They include the widening of I-10 between US 60 and I-17 by Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport from 4 general purpose lanes to 6 general purpose lanes, and add an additional HOV lane in both directions that is highlighted in blue on the map. Construction of the collector distributor or CD roads that run alongside I-10 in both directions between Baseline Road and about 40th Street to separate the mainline I-10 traffic from the traffic that's exiting and entering the freeway. Construction of 2 new multi-use bridges over the freeway between Baseline Roads and Broadway, Baseline and Broadway roads. And then also the widening of the Guadalupe Road Bridge over I-10 and the widening of the I-10 bridges over the Gila River. And then the reconstruction of the I-10 and SR 143 and the I-10 and US 60 interchanges, and replacement of the 48th Street and Broadway Road bridges. As I mentioned earlier, we are very close to the end of the construction process for this project. We are in the fourth and final phase. During this phase, we will have crews complete the work on the interchange, the reconstruction of the interchange at SR 143 and I-10, and at I-10 and US 60. Crews will also work on finalizing the lighting and the landscaping and the roadway surface work and installation of did I say already lighting, installation of lighting. So now I am going to talk about some of the construction highlights from last time we presented to TPC. We're going to start on the west end of the project over at the I-10 bridges over the Salt River and then move our way east. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the placement of the concrete bridge girders for the new I-10 bridges over Salt River. This bridge is being widened to add 2 additional travel lanes in each direction. And this is what those bridges look like now. This photo was taken about 5 days right before the new additional lanes on I-10 opened in both directions. So you can see where the original bridge was, the lanes on the original bridge, and then the added portion of the widened bridge here. Moving east to I-10 and 32nd Street, that interchange, crews had to reconfigure the on and off ramps at this interchange in order to widen I-10. So it took crews about 40 to 65 days to reconstruct each ramp. So you can see here from January to October, it took about 10 months to completely reconfigure the on and off ramps at I-10 and SR 143. And those are now open to motorists and are being used. Moving on to I-10 and 40th Street, same story here for this interchange. The on and off ramps had to be reconfigured in order to make room for the widening of I-10. You can see what the interchange looked like at the beginning of the project and what it looks like now. Most noticeable is the removal of that eastbound I-10 40th Street loop ramp in the bottom right corner of that bottom photo you see. If you've driven through the I-10 and SR 143 interchange, you've probably noticed a lot of work taking place here. In this time lapse, let's see if I can get it to play. Oops, it is not playing. Construction for this interchange included new transition ramps from southbound SR 143 to eastbound I-10 and from westbound I-10 to northbound SR 143. Those bridges are open. The last piece to be completed at this interchange is the opening of the new HOV flyover ramps for motorists who are traveling on westbound I-10 in the HOV lane to northbound SR 143, and then for motorists who are traveling in the southbound SR 143 lanes to eastbound I-10. As you heard earlier, when I was going over the project components, the 48th Street bridges over I-10 were completely replaced. You can see what the bridge looked like in April of 2022 and what it looks like today. Now, the new bridges were constructed next to the old ones, and once traffic was transitioned onto the new bridge, the old bridge was removed. We have the same thing that took place at the Broadway Road Bridge over I-10. You'll see what that bridge looked like back in April of 2022 and what it looks like today. Again, the new bridges were constructed next to the old ones, and then the old bridges were removed, and motorists are using that bridge now. I am now going to pass this presentation on to Nicole. She will highlight some more of the construction, some of the project construction work, and then she'll move on to some of the outreach efforts that were conducted that kept stakeholders, project partners, and the public informed throughout the whole process.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pick up our tour at the US 60 and I-10 interchange, and it seems like our time lapses aren't working very well, but there's been a lot of changes here since January 2024, but most notably are the collector distributor roads that were built along the outside of the US 60. And part of that work last summer, you may remember that the eastbound I-10 baseline off-ramp was closed for a long term, and so that we could reconfigure it so that the eastbound CD road would fit into it. On either side of the US 60 interchange, we have two multi-use bridges that are going up. So one is at Alameda Drive near the Tempe Diablo Stadium. The other is connecting the Western Canal over I-10 near Arizona Mills Mall. Since we were last here, we put those final truss pieces and put the whole piece in at once. And that's the part that we'll eventually be walking over. Since then, what you're seeing in the pictures, the crews have focused on putting in the artwork. So the artwork was designed and paid for by the city of Tempe. They worked with a local artist through Collab Studios that they were inspired by the fruit of the prickly pear cactus. So I'm sure if you've driven through, you've seen these giant cylindrical structures. Those are the fruit. Each bridge has about 10 of them. They're all now in place. And the fun part about these is when we are able to walk on these bridges, you will be able to see shadow art. So as the sun shines through those cylindrical structures, we'll be seeing some art on the bridges. the pedestrian bridges will be one of the last pieces that open up on this project. And part of that is the reason for it is that we don't want to encourage pedestrians or cyclists to be entering the work zone while it is still an active work zone. Collector distributor roads, we've mentioned these a few times. These were one of the most anticipated parts of the project. So they are 2 or 3 lanes that were built on the outside of I-10 between 40th Street and Baseline Road. The idea was to separate the traffic that is getting on and off I-10 in the Broadway curve from the traffic that's just simply traveling through. And the idea behind that was to eliminate the weaving that you see, because we have 3 freeways that connect and kind of merge in a very small 3-mile area. As you can see on the slide, the westbound CD road opened in August of last year. The eastbound CD road opened in November. And because this configuration was relatively new to Arizona drivers, the Arizona Department of Transportation put together the Find Your Lane campaign to help drivers learn about the roads before they open, and hopefully know where they're going when it open. Our campaign reached about 2 million people. We had 73 social posts that had more than 85,000 engagements in them. And we also went out to 26 community events. So you may have seen us at a table. We had a fun little map with a Matchbox car that you could drive your route to work. And it allowed us to talk one-on-one with almost 1,000 people to get them hands-on, get their questions answered right there. We did some paid local advertising in local newspapers, and then all of our campaign materials went back to the project website, where you could get frequently asked questions, directions to destinations in the Broadway curve, and to see a visual animation on how they would operate when they open. After the eastbound road, CD road opened, we did do a survey to see, did those campaign materials help? We asked, based on what the information you had before it opened, how comfortable were you with driving the CD roads for the first time? And 79% of the respondents in that survey said that they were somewhat or very comfortable with driving on the CD roads for the first time. You can see all of the materials are still up on the website. It's i10broadwaycurve.com/Find Your Lane. So that campaign was just one small aspect of a very large public outreach effort that has been on this project. It was really important to ADOT that our project stakeholders, businesses, residents, commuters, and regional traffic have the information that they needed to make decisions before they left the house every day. So you can see just some of the things that we did over the course of the last 3 years to make sure that people were getting the information that they needed, from social media to doing project tours. We went out and canvassed before every single closure to make sure businesses knew when there would be freeway closures, newsletters, a ton of media outreach, and just getting out and being in the community and talking with people. So what's next? I'm sure this is a question on everyone's minds. There's still some work to be done before we have substantial completion later this spring. Crews will need to open up that second HOV lane that is now open, and that will open at the same time as the dual HOV flyover ramp that Marcy talked about that connects I-10 and State Route 143. That'll be a pretty critical connection for folks heading to Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. We also have those multi-use bridges that will open sometimes in May. And then you can expect to see crews out there doing some final cleanup, some landscaping, lighting, final striping, and just getting things ready so that we can finally take those orange cones down and open up the road completely. We do recognize that this project has been incredibly impactful. So we kind of wanted to close with some of the benefits that we are seeing now or will see as we head towards the end of completion. Everything from reduced travel times, improved safety, improved access to the Phoenix International Airport, and even seeing some economic impacts. We did anticipate that we would add some long-term jobs and construction jobs and put some money into our local economy. We recognize that those are very important benefits for the people in our communities, for the drivers, for our region. And so we want to thank you all for hanging in there with us for the last few years, and so that we can all see these many benefits at the end of the project. And now I know there's a few of you here who are probably asking, but what about the picture? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, have Marcy come over and be the one who gets to show it to you. But a couple of weeks ago, this picture that you're seeing right here is the initial opening picture of the Broadway curve from 1968. And some of us had this crazy idea a few months ago to say, hey, what if we recreated that? And fortunately for us, the stars aligned and we were able to take advantage of an already planned freeway closure and get a whole bunch of people out on the freeway, including our field crews, our engineers, and a lot of people who touched the project, our project stakeholders, several of the mayors who are part of this committee, and Governor Katie Hobbs. So I will let Marcy do the honors.
All right, so we've received a lot of requests for the new photo, but this is what we shot with our drone Super Bowl Sunday morning. We actually got nearly 80 folks come out to partake in this historic photo group shoot, and here it is. Immensely different from 1968 in terms of the view. So we will be sending this photo out to our project partners. So if you'd like a copy, let me know. And thank you for your time, everyone.
Chair, members of TPC, that ends our presentation today. This is on your agenda for information and discussion. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you, Quinn, Marcy, and Nicole. We appreciate the presentation. I recognize this is supposed to be finished in spring of 25. I'm going to argue that we skipped spring of 25 since it's almost 90 next week, but very much anticipated for our spring camp coming up in this project completion. So well done, long time coming, but what it creates for all of our shared constituency moving forward. So appreciate all the work. Are there any comments or questions from our committee? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. We skipped spring. Yes.
I just want to
Vice
say it's an incredible choreographed dance that you had in this, being able to get all this stuff done. We really appreciate it. Being in Tempe, we've been watching it a lot. I have taken the wrong road to get to the airport a couple times, but I've figured it out now. And I really like, what did you call them? The collector distributor lanes. Love, love, love those. I followed the information on ADOT's social media, so that was really helpful for that information to get out there. And we have so many people there looking forward to doing that bike walk crossover the freeway, especially with spring training coming up. So thank you so much. You guys are just absolutely incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any additional comments? If not, thank you so much for the presentation. We will move right into our legislative update. And this is for information and discussion.
Madam Chair, we
Yes.
can actually skip that in the interest of time.
We'll skip that. Okay. A lot going on there. So we'll have I'm sure an extra long update next meeting. And is there a request from membership on future agenda items? Hearing none, are there any comments or announcements from our membership? Okay. With that, the next meeting of our Transportation Policy Committee will be Wednesday, March 19th, 2025 at 11:30 a.m. No further business. Today's meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Take care. Thank you, Chair.